I grew up in a small town outside Hanoi, where the streets were quiet after dusk. I was the eldest child, the one who always had to be responsible. My brother Min was 8 years younger, and everyone adored him. When he cried, my mother rushed to him, even if I was the one hurt. When he failed a test, she blamed the teacher, never him. I learned early that being the older one meant swallowing my pride. I fixed his toys, helped him with homework, and defended him in school. Sometimes he thanked me, but most times, he just walked away. My father, Mr. Lamb, worked long hours as a driver, barely home for dinner. When he was home, he'd look at Min and say, "You're the future of this family." He never said that to me, even when I brought home top grades. I graduated with honors, but my certificate stayed folded in a drawer. They didn't come to my ceremony, because Min had a soccer match. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was strong enough without praise. But every night, I lay awake, wondering why love felt like something I had to earn. When I was 18, I got a scholarship and a part-time job at a bookstore. I paid part of the rent, while Min got new sneakers and games. Mom said, "He's still a boy, Lynn, don't compare yourself to him." But he wasn't a boy when he shouted at me, calling me bossy and cold. I bit my tongue, afraid to make my mother cry again. I told myself family came before feelings, before fairness. Still, I noticed how my kindness became invisible to them. They never saw how many hours I worked just to keep things together. When the electricity bill came, I paid it. When the fridge broke, I bought a new one. When Min needed a laptop, I used my savings. I thought I was doing what any sister should. But slowly, giving became the only way they noticed me. If I stopped, they acted like I didn't exist. Once, on my birthday, I invited them to dinner at my tiny apartment. Min didn't come. He said he was busy gaming with friends. Mom sent a text, "We'll celebrate next time, dear." Next time never came. That night, I sat alone with a store-bought cake, staring at the candle. It melted faster than I could make a wish. I realized then that love in my family was a transaction. The more I gave, the more they expected and the less they cared. But I still kept trying, hoping they would one day see me. Every success I had, I shared with them, waiting for approval. It never came. Instead, they said, "Don't forget where you came from, Lynn." As if success was something shameful. I carried that guilt like a shadow through my 20s. I told myself it was normal, that every family had its flaws. But deep down, I knew something was broken. Not in me, but in the way they loved. And no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. When I finished college, I found a job at an architecture firm in the city. It was my first real step toward independence, my first breath of freedom. The salary wasn't huge, but it was steady, and I felt proud of myself. My parents congratulated me briefly, then asked if I could help Min with tuition. He had just started university and didn't have a part-time job. They said money was tight, that he needed my support to focus on studying. I agreed without hesitation, thinking it was my duty as the eldest. Every month, I transferred the tuition fees straight from my account. I also signed the lease for his apartment near campus. When the landlord hesitated, I used my credit to guarantee it. Mom called me generous. But it wasn't generosity. It was guilt disguised as love. Min never said thank you. He joked that I liked playing the rich sister. I laughed it off, pretending his words didn't sting. He started using the credit card I gave him for emergencies. Emergencies soon meant pizza at midnight, concert tickets, and new clothes. I paid the bill in silence, hoping he would mature someday. But instead, his resentment grew with my success. Every time I mentioned work, he rolled his eyes. When I bought my first small condo, he called me a show-off. "Who needs that much space alone?" he said, half sneering. At family dinners, he'd mock my job, calling it boring and corporate. Mom laughed, saying, "He's just teasing." Dad nodded, Don't take it so seriously. No one ever defended me. No one ever told him to stop. I began to realize that my achievements made them uncomfortable. They preferred the version of me that struggled, not the one that thrived. Still, I kept helping. When the refrigerator at home broke, I sent them money. When Min crashed his motorbike, I paid for the repairs. When they wanted to repaint the house, I covered the cost. They said they'd pay me back someday. That day never came. The pattern was endless, and I was trapped in it. Sometimes I wondered if they loved me, or just loved my stability. When I confronted Mom once, she said, "You're doing well, we're family." As if success meant I owed them more. I stopped arguing. I just worked harder, filling the emptiness with long hours. My coworkers called me dependable. My boss said I had leadership potential. But at home, I was just Lynn, the backup plan, the wallet, the fixer. Even my happiness was seen as arrogance. When I got engaged to Fong, they barely reacted. Min didn't congratulate me. He only asked, "So, who's paying for the wedding?" That question hit me like a slap. I laughed to hide my hurt, but something inside me cracked. I began to see how deep the imbalance had grown. I was their safety net, not their daughter. And every time I gave, I lost another piece of myself. Yet, even knowing that, I still couldn't stop. Because I believed love meant sacrifice. And I hadn't learned, yet that real love doesn't demand your peace. When my grandparents' 60th wedding anniversary approached, I wanted it to be special. They were the only ones who ever made me feel seen, truly seen. Grandma loved jasmine tea, and Grandpa always asked for chocolate cake. I told myself this celebration would be my gift to them, a memory they'd cherish. I booked a lakeside venue, a small hall surrounded by trees and soft light. It cost more than I could afford, but I didn't hesitate. I wanted everything to be perfect. Flowers, music, food, every single detail. Fong helped me negotiate with vendors, calm and patient as always. My best friend, my Anne, designed the invitations by hand, with golden lettering. When I showed the plans to my parents, they nodded without much interest. Min frowned and said, "You always have to make a big show, don't you?" His words stung more than I wanted to admit. Mom smiled softly and said, "He's just stressed with school, dear." Dad added, "Let him be, you're doing fine." I swallowed my frustration and forced a smile. That night, I stayed up late arranging the seating chart, pretending I wasn't hurt. I kept telling myself this was for Grandma and Grandpa, not for approval. Still, I couldn't ignore the ache that followed me like a shadow. On the morning of the event, I arrived early at the venue. The air smelled of fresh flowers and rain. I checked the tables, adjusted the chairs, and counted the desserts twice. My Anne arrived with decorations, and a laugh that lightened the room. Fong carried boxes of lights, teasing me about being a perfectionist. By noon, the hall shimmered with warmth and color. Guests began arriving, cousins, old friends, neighbors, all smiling and chatting. Grandma wore her favorite lilac dress, and Grandpa's suit was neatly pressed. Seeing them happy made everything worth it. For a few hours, I let myself believe that family could feel whole again. Then Min showed up an hour late, wearing a wrinkled hoodie. He looked around with disinterest, grabbed a soda and muttered, "Nice flowers." Before I could reply, he added, "Trying to be a wedding planner now." I ignored him, focusing on greeting the guests. But he wasn't done. At the buffet table, he poked at the food and said loudly, "This looks cheap." Laughter died, heads turned. I felt the heat rise to my face, but I kept moving, refusing to create a scene. My Anne pulled him aside, whispering something firm. He shrugged and walked away, smirking. The music played on, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every time I looked at Min, I saw something darker in his eyes. It wasn't teasing anymore. It was resentment, cold and deliberate. I tried to shake off the feeling, reminding myself why I was there. The afternoon sun shimmered on the lake, and Grandma's laughter filled the air. I held on to that sound, hoping it would drown out everything else. But deep down, I knew the peace wouldn't last. Something was coming, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The afternoon sun was soft when it happened. Guests were laughing, clinking glasses, telling stories from years past. I stood near the dessert table, exhausted but proud that everything looked beautiful. Then Min pushed back his chair with a loud screech. The sound cut through the laughter like glass breaking. He stood, eyes sharp, a smirk curling on his lips. "Let's talk about Lynn," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned to look at him, confusion flickering in their eyes. He pointed at me, as if I were a stranger on trial. Always showing off her job, her fancy condo, like she's better than the rest of us. My breath caught. He kept going, words dripping with venom. "She doesn't care about this family. She's forgotten who helped her get here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but my voice wouldn't come out. Before I could move, Mom stood up beside him. "Min's right," she said, her tone sharp and full of judgment. "You're too busy with your career to bother with us anymore." Dad leaned forward, his eyes cold and unrecognizing. "This family would have been better off without you," he said slowly. The words hit harder than any slap could. The room went silent, even the music stopped mid-note. I felt every gaze, every breath pressing against me like a weight. My chest tightened, my hands trembling around the edge of the table. I'd spent months planning this day, paying for everything they enjoyed. And now, in front of everyone, I was the villain. Min wasn't finished. He started packing, voice rising with each accusation. "She acts like a hero, throwing money around just to feel superior." He laughed bitterly. "This whole party is just her showing off." Guests looked away, uncomfortable, not sure where to stand. My Anne clenched her fists, ready to defend me, but I shook my head. This was my humiliation to face. Mom crossed her arms, glaring. "You've always acted like you're above us," she said. Dad nodded, silent but agreeing. Their words echoed in my head, each one heavier than the last. My throat burned, but I stayed still. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, everything I believed cracking. The room that once felt warm now felt suffocating. Through the blur, I saw Grandma sitting quietly at the head table. Her hands were clasped, her face calm but unreadable. She didn't interrupt, not yet. Min kept shouting, his anger spinning out of control. I could barely hear him anymore. All I heard was the sound of my heartbeat, steady but broken. And then, through the chaos, Grandma rose from her chair. Her voice was soft, but carried through the hall like thunder. "Enough," she said. The word sliced through the noise, and silence followed. Every head turned toward her. Even Min froze mid-sentence. In that silence, I felt something shift. Whatever came next would change everything forever. Grandma stood tall, her silver hair catching the light from the window. Her voice didn't tremble, but the silence around her did. "It's time everyone knows the truth," she said slowly, her eyes on my parents. Mom's face paled, and Dad looked away. "Lynn didn't abandon this family," Grandma continued. "You two did." Gasps rippled through the room, whispers rising like a tide. She took a breath, steady and cold. "You took 600 million from our savings, saying it was for Min's tuition." Her words hit like thunder. My heart stopped for a moment. The air in the hall grew heavy. I stared at her, unable to speak. She went on, her gaze unwavering. "You told Lynn we couldn't afford to help, made her believe she had to pay." The guests turned toward my parents, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Mom tried to interrupt. "It's not what you think, Mother." Grandma raised her hand. "No more lies," she said firmly. "You used our money, let her carry your burden, and made her feel guilty for it." The room was so quiet that even the lake outside seemed to hold its breath. I felt my knees weaken, the truth sinking deep into me. All those nights working late, the bills I paid, the sacrifices I made. They weren't duty. They were manipulation. I looked at Mom. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Min needed it more. He's still finding his way." Dad added quickly, "We didn't have a choice. You're doing fine, Lynn." I almost laughed. Doing fine. I'd spent years breaking myself to hold this family together. I could see the faces of the guests, stunned, silent, judging. My Anne stood by the door, tears in her eyes. Fong placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, grounding me. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Grandma turned toward me. "She gave everything," she said, her voice softer now. "And you let her." The shame on my parents' faces was brief, replaced by anger. But it didn't matter anymore. Something inside me snapped like glass cracking under pressure. I straightened my back, my voice clear despite the tremor. "No," I said. "I'm done carrying this family." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Mom opened her mouth to protest, but I shook my head. No more guilt, no more lies. Dad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence stretched, painful and freeing all at once. Grandma nodded slowly, pride flickering in her eyes. "You did right, child," she whispered. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my chest. The truth had burned everything I thought I knew. But in the ashes, I felt something new, peace. I wasn't their provider anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was simply Lynn. And for the first time, that was enough. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling through the window. My phone buzzed with messages, but I ignored them. For the first time in years, I felt calm. The anger, the guilt, the endless weight of obligation, it was gone. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, thinking about everything. The truth had broken something inside me, but it also set me free. I opened my laptop and began making calls. First, the university. "My name is Lynn Nguyen," I said, voice steady. "I'm withdrawing sponsorship for Min's tuition, effective immediately." The clerk confirmed it, her tone neutral, but to me, it sounded like liberation. Next, I called the landlord for Min's apartment. "I won't be responsible for payments anymore," I said. He sighed, said he'd contact Min directly. Then I canceled the credit card I had given him years ago. Each click, each confirmation, felt like cutting a chain. By noon, my phone rang again, Min's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was sharp, trembling with fury. "You're cutting me off. After everything, you're so selfish." I let him finish. Then I said quietly, "You'll figure it out, Min." He shouted something else, but I ended the call. My hands shook, but my heart was steady. An hour later, Mom called. "How could you do this to your brother?" she demanded. "He needs you, Lynn. You're abandoning your family." Dad's voice came next, deep and bitter. "You owe us, after all we've done for you." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath and said, "No, I've given enough." They tried to argue, but I didn't listen. I hung up, tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness but release. That afternoon, Fong came over with takeout and 2 cups of coffee. He didn't ask questions, just sat beside me. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You've been saving everyone but yourself for too long." I leaned into him, the exhaustion finally catching up. My Anne came later, full of fire as always. "I'm proud of you," she said, hugging me tight. "You finally stopped letting them use your love as leverage." We laughed, even through the ache, and it felt good to breathe again. That night, I deleted every saved number that brought me pain. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that heals. For years, I believed love meant endurance, no matter the cost. Now I knew better. Love without respect isn't love, it's control. I stared out the window. the city lights blinking like distant stars. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was building something new, something honest. Freedom didn't feel loud or wild. It felt like peace. It felt like finally coming home to myself. 6 months passed, and my life felt lighter than ever. The silence from my family no longer hurt, it healed. I lived with Fong in our small condo, surrounded by calm and laughter. We spent weekends cooking, reading, and planning small trips together. I visited Grandma often, bringing flowers and her favorite pastries. She'd smile and say, "Peace suits you, child." And it did. Min found a job at a cafe, still blaming me for his struggles. Mom left a few voicemails, each one filled with guilt and accusation. I stopped listening to them long ago. Their voices no longer had power over me. I learned that walking away doesn't make you heartless. It makes you whole. Family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who respects your soul. I stopped chasing approval from people who never saw my worth. Instead, I built a life that reflected my truth. Sometimes I still think about that reunion, the pain, the breaking point. But now, it feels like the moment I was reborn. Because from that day on, I wasn't living for them anymore. I was finally living for me.